All right, looks like I'm live. So, welcome to this live edition of my YouTube channel. No particular reason why I wanted to start this, even though there's been some activity online. But thanks for joining me and send me questions. Some people, what was that chat? I gotta put that one up there. I like this one. Yeah, there we go. That's a good one right there. So the Christian nationalist movement must be Protestant, says Zeb. Okay, good. All right, yeah, that is true. But that's not the reason why I wanted to do this live little video today. I'm trying to do more of these. I'm trying to get a better set. I guess you look behind me. It's okay. I'm up in my restored or completed attic. This house was like 40 years old, and we buy it, and then this part was not actually completed. So we finished it. The doors still need some work, as you can see behind me. But this is where all the action happens. This is where I do all of my computer work and office work. But all right, what I want to talk about briefly up front will be a little bit about the idea of Protestant retrieval. You've heard me talk about this a lot. You'll see different people talk about this. I tweeted out this morning a quote from Kevin DeYoung in his review of my book. Where is it? Let me pull it up. Wolf's Retrieval Project from 16th and 17th century sources is largely correct, says Kevin DeYoung. So that was the first point. He wanted to say nice things about the book before he trashed it. And that was the first thing he said. So what does that mean? It means that I have largely tried to pull from sources from the 16th to 17th century to develop a Christian political theory. That would be both theological sources and political sources as well. And so that's what he's referring to, and is largely correct, which is very, very nice of him to say, because some people have said otherwise. I'm curious if I ever actually would be able to have a conversation with Kevin DeYoung. Maybe next week. Maybe next week when I'm up in Richmond, near the PCA General Assembly. I'm not going to go to the General Assembly. I don't think I've been invited. I'm not a church officer. But I will be in the area having lunch and dinner with friends, and then perhaps have a little event afterwards. And maybe I get to meet him and talk about, hey, what did you mean by this? That it's largely correct. I'm curious. But it's interesting quote, because what that means is that a lot of my conclusions, at least I would think, are consistent with those guys in those eras. So for everyone from Calvin all the way up into like Rutherford and others within the 17th century. So I'm pulling from the foundational centuries of the Reformed tradition. I mean, with all the kind of recovery and retrieval work that's been done in the last couple of decades, like we really see that when it comes to Reformed theological systemization, it really was at its high point in the 17th century, probably around 1760, 70, or 80. And then usually they think of a sort of decline as there was a Cartesian influence and other methodological changes. But anyway, like those were the foundational centuries. So the fact that that is I'm consistent with those guys, I think speaks something about the project. Now that doesn't mean I'm right. That doesn't mean that everything I conclude or what they conclude is true. But I mean, I don't know. It's one of these weird things that I'm always kind of surprised when these guys who are constantly praising Turretin, Calvin, and they'll cite Rutherford, and they'll cite, maybe Althusius, which is interesting. And these other guys, or Beza or Butzer, like, oh, we love these guys. Yeah, well, why are you attacking Wolf then for his political positions? Another irony is a lot of these guys wrote against Jews like really strongly, and yet they don't care about citing Butzer or citing Luther or citing Calvin or citing Rutherford or citing Vermigli. All these guys did that, but they don't have any problem with that, because I guess there's a distance and people just don't know. But anyway, that is one of those interesting things. You'll cite these heroes of the faith, like you'll cite these guys over and over for doctrine of God, for justification, for sanctification, for doctrine of Scripture, even for ethics, and these other things, but not when it comes to politics. It's like there's a disconnect almost. And this is like almost like a sort of Carl Truman thing, where he will go like over and over say, let's return to the sources, when it comes to doctrine of God, which I'm all for. I think that in the 20th century, a lot of things went wrong in Reformed theology, Reformed political thought, all sorts of things, epistemology, rejection of natural law, all that. I think a lot of things went wrong in the 20th century that was directly opposed to the tradition that everyone claimed at the time. Um, and the recovery, all that's important. So recovering the doctrine of God is very important. And I honestly, I love to see, one of my favorite things to see on online is to see reformed theologians debating about the doctrine of the Trinity. I like that because that's like the central. That's like one of the most important things a theologian can do, and it's also nice to see a theologian um try to tackle a theological question that doesn't really have any clear bearing upon ethics and politics. I know people try to do this Trinitarian thing and make it apply to husband and wife relations, which I think is all nonsense and stupid. But I mean, but to see a theologian just deal with the theology proper without jumping into politics, it warms my heart because that's like you should want to enter theology, the discipline, to do that sort of thing, to tackle theological questions that, doesn't have some like grand application for your political life. And that's so anyway, I always like seeing that. Why did I get on that? Oh yeah. So they'll do things like they'll say, let's cite Vermeely on Doctrine of God, which I'm like, yeah. But then when it comes to politics, they suddenly say, well, no, we don't want that. We don't want to talk about the politics and the idea of a Christian magistrate. We're just pilgrims here. We're strangers to this world. The world is not ours. This world is not our home. And so they start doing what? They start citing essentially the Anabaptist talking points. That should be weird. Shouldn't it be weird that in like I don't know, hour one they're saying yes, this and this, Aquinas on Doctrine of God, and then Turretin on Doctrine of God, and then Vermeely Doctrine of God. But hour two, it's like politics. Well, yeah, Roger Williams. Yeah, Roger Williams. Or yeah, all these like quasi kind of like neo Anabaptist types in the evangelical world in the last 20 years. Yeah, yeah, those guys. Yeah, but not Calvin. Don't dare quote Calvin or Turretin or Junius or Zanchius. Don't quote these guys. Don't follow these guys. You follow these more modern guys like Roger Williams. Yeah, Roger Williams was a total nut and he was isolated. And in the end, his church consisted of him and his wife and kids. And also, yeah, he was a little bit crazy. His own church kicked him out because they realized he was crazy. Yeah, that's all true. Yeah, okay, so sure. He was actually kicked out of New England, not for religious liberty stuff, but because he essentially attacked everyone, said no one was a Christian, attacked the charter, the founding charter of the place. Yeah, he denied like that you could take a loyalty oath to the civil magistrate because they were concerned about subversion. Yeah, he did all that. That's why he's good. But really, Roger Williams. So this is what the sort of thing you confront like day to day. This is what I have to deal with all the time. But what about Roger Williams? Yeah. But by the way, if you read the correspondence between Williams and John Cotton, it's just obvious that John Cotton is like running circles around the guy because this is what happens. It's like within like religious liberty debates in general. If you want to say, "Oh, who you read?" Okay, you got to read Roger Williams, or you read like James Madison. James Madison's he wrote in response to Patrick Henry's bill and all that. You can what it's a remonstrance. I forget what it's called. It's his memorial. That's usually what it's called. You can look at that, but the arguments are just they sound smart. But then if you've actually read the debates between like Rutherford and Baptists and Gillespie and these other guys who are arguing for Christian magistracy and Christian laws and blasphemy laws and those things, or a sort of closer church state integration, I guess. You realize that none of those arguments are actually very good, that they're actually very sloppy and bad arguments. The irony of people citing Elisha Williams and those other guys within like the American 18th century context is one, their arguments actually aren't that good, in my opinion. They're probably Elisha Williams is probably a little better, but then the irony is that they're appealing essentially to Protestant assumptions. So Protestant assumptions about the nature of the conscience, the freedom of the conscience. They're essentially adopting English, like Anglo-Protestant assumptions or premises in their argumentation for religious liberty, which is, there's nothing wrong with that. I don't think there's anything inconsistent with that. But yeah, when you see that, you realize that, okay, the actual background conditions for the Baptists in asserting religious liberty were basic Protestant positions that go all the way back to, I guess ironically maybe, to Calvin and Luther, who said that there is liberty of conscience, that the conscience is actually free from the dictates of men, and you are bound and responsible to God alone. And the ministerial function with regard to theological truth and salvation is to persuade you into that. So that's why there's no the teaching function of the instituted church is not to say, is not to command that you believe something, and you believe simply on the authority of the command or the minister or the church, but that their authority is that they take the words of the word of God and appeals directly to the soul, such that you would be convinced of in your own mind, affirm it, have trust in it. That's the Protestant position, even going back all the way to Calvin and Luther. Calvin, of course, says this explicitly. I'm sure Luther does as well. I just haven't seen it. We have to, appeal straight to the soul. To the soul. That's why the church sort of governs the soul, and it tries to persuade you into the truth of God. So you take this all the way back up to the 17th century. You see these guys, these largely Baptists, but other people too, like Samuel. What's his name? It'll come to me in a dream. But these other guys essentially appealing to basic Protestant positions, which means again that the religious liberty that flourished in the 18th and 19th centuries were based upon the Protestant positions that you must be convinced in your own mind, apart from any earthly institutional authority that commands belief, that's not allowed, whether it's the state or it's a church. You have to be actually persuaded in your own mind. And so in that sense, the conscience is free. How did I get on that? Anyway, retrieval. And so, but what is this thing called, like, Protestant retrieval? That it's been going on for a while. Oh yeah. So again, like, people should just recognize that you need to have a reason. You need to have a reason why you would choose doctrine of God stuff in the retrieval projects, but not politics. There could be a good reason. I'm just saying it's odd when like you're saying yes, doctrine of God from Turretin, but then wait, he says that the magistrate can punish heretics. And we don't want that. But why? Like, why one or the other? And you have to have a reason for that. And I think if someone does choose to say, okay, doctrine of God and their politics, if that is something someone chooses, that ought to be something that you recognize as, okay, that seems fair. That's fine. That's not a big deal. That shouldn't be a big deal. But why is it all a big deal? Why is it a big deal? Why did people lose their minds when I said, yeah, in principle, it's permissible for a civil magistrate within a very Christian context to look at a heretic, like an anti-Trinitarian heretic, and say, this guy is bad for society. He's bad for Christian discipline. He's crazy. And he's going to harm the souls of my people. And he says, I'm going to suppress that guy. And they go through the process and all that to have that suppressed, whether it's banishment or it's imprisonment or it's saying stop, do that, and fining them, whatever the price, whatever the punishment will be, they go about to do that. That was very, very, very sort of common. And so when someone else says, yeah, I think this in certain contexts, this would be permissible and prudent, and everyone loses their mind, you wonder what, like, look, again, everyone affirmed this. And even on, like, the blasphemy question, most of the founders affirmed that you could have some sort of blasphemy law, like that denying that that God exists. To them, at the very least, they thought of it as being bad for the people, in one that they can't take a serious oath, right? So you can't trust them because they would lie. This is one reason why you had a religious test for office, was that if you affirm that God exists, and you affirm that there's an afterlife of reward and punishments of some form, which is kind of bare theism at the very least. There were higher ones like the Christian religion or Trinitarian religion or Protestant religion you see in some constitutions, state constitutions. But at the very least, it was that affirmation. And why is that? Well, because there had to be some kind of religious ground for society to maintain some level of morality and oath keeping. And just yesterday, someone posted this chart of different religions and non-religions of people who affirm whether 18 and younger can have like transgender surgeries. And atheists were like 30% said, no, so the question was, should you ban it? And only like 30% of atheists said no, whereas white evangelicals were at like 85%. And then it went down from there for everyone else. And then there was like Buddhists were low, agnostics were low, Jews were only at 50%. And so if you affirm, and what appears to be, you affirm some version of kind of Christianity, then Christianity, it leads you to affirm that you ought to do the obvious, which is to ban transgender surgery for minors. So that's the idea, that if you make sort of public pronouncements of atheism, agnosticism, or certain forms of it illegal, and you punish those things, that is a trainer, sort of a corrective to society to maintain that fundamental foundation of theism from which these good actual moral policies arise. That's just basic founder stuff. It's basic Christian stuff. That's even basic pagan stuff. I mean, you look in like Plato's Laws, his the book, The Laws. He says that atheists essentially should be put, or I think he says put to death or just punished. And that's for the very same reason. Like, you can't trust if he doesn't believe there's any sort of divine being that can correct his errors either now or in some future life, then you really can't trust him at all. And so, yeah. So again, back to the retrieval thing. What do we do? What do we mean by that? When I say like we do this retrieval thing, and one reason why I like it is not simply because it's old. Like, it's not, it's not this thing where it's older, so it's better. It's like the flip side of the modern principle that everything new is better than what was old. So we don't want to flip back to that extreme, just as like it was older must be better. So that's clearly not true in a lot of ways. But the reason why I like the retrieval projects, that is usually pulling from these 16th and 17th century sources that would then be translated or kind of edited so you can consume it for the average person. One reason is that I just think their argumentation is better. I mean, these guys went through rigorous training in philosophy, in law, in method, and if you read these works, they said, hey, I want to prove proposition X. How do I prove proposition X? And they go through the logic and method to try to accomplish that, whether it's from reason alone, or it's from experience, or it's from scripture, or it's a combination of all three of those to prove proposition X. And so that's what they do. That's what they attempt to do. And then when they respond to someone and say, I don't agree with you, proposition X is actually false. They don't, then they say, how do I demonstrate that proposition X is false? And so they go through ways to say, actually, the contrary of X is true, therefore X must be false, or something like that. They go through a process of refuting that proposition. And so, I mean, this is like, I guess you could say it's Protestant scholasticism or whatever, but the fact of the matter is, they also thought that your propositions, your theological conclusions, have to fit in with a broad array of knowledge. That there's this like assumption that the body of knowledge available to man in the world, which would be a combination of general revelation and special revelation, scripture containing both, that is a unified whole. That you think of the idea of the university, the idea that there is sort of one. There's a wholeness to the truth, and this has to all fit within a rational, systematic. It has to be sort of a rational system. Meaning that if you affirm X, you can't also affirm Y if they are contraries or they contradict. Like that wouldn't work. One would refute the other, or both are wrong in the case of contraries. And so you'd have to then you'd have to this is the way you'd work out your theological system. So because they were very mindful of that, when I look at 16th, 17th century sources, and they all essentially say the same thing. They're all reformed, they're all part of the same movement, and they say, pretty much universally say, this is how we articulate this doctrine, boom. I I think you can take that as an authority on what the reform position probably must say. In other words, for their system to actually work, they'd have to affirm that proposition. That's kind of my assumption going in. Now, that's not to say it's demonstrated as true, or you have, by simply appealing to authority. But if everyone said it, and they're also within their mind systematicians, then I think it's a good bet that really, if you're reformed, you probably need to affirm that. Okay, it's not the ground for your belief, but you're basically moving from saying there's a good bet. It's like a sort of default position, if you will. But that's one reason. I think it also just trains people in how to think well. Like if you read a lot of modern theology, and then or theology written in the modern times, whether they call it reformed or not, and then you go back and read these guys in the 17th century, it's just a very, very different method. It's a very different process of trying to demonstrate things. Um, and I think it's just better. And when I wrote my book, I don't think I'm comparable in any sense to practically anyone, um, and within the 17th century, in intellect and learning. But that is what I tried to do. I mean, the epilogue is a unique thing. Okay, that's a unique thing. But I tried to do that. Well, what's the question at issue? So, like my chapter on liberty of conscience, I said, what is the actual question between me and like a modern religious liberty guy? What is the actual? What does it come down to? What is the actual question? And so I say what the question is not. Like if you read Turton's Institutes, before he gets to the actual question, he'll say the question is not this, it's not that, it's not that, because he realized that there's actually agreement on things with opponents. So like if a religious liberty advocate guy, now a modern one, says something like, I disagree with the traditional view because it's wrong to force people to believe the gospel. Okay, that's if they say that, then what they're doing is they're assuming the wrong question, because no one affirmed that. I don't affirm that. Calvin didn't affirm that. Luther didn't affirm that. Arguably, Augustine didn't affirm that, even though he has some interesting things to say about that. But no reformer said that. No one believed you could force faith. Like I just said earlier, that faith is a matter of persuasion. So if which you hear this all the time. In fact, Andrew Walker literally wrote a book, an entire book that assumed that's what the position was classically. Um, citing and the book cites like dozens of other Baptists who say the same exact thing. So it's a complete disaster. By it, I mean the entire, like for the most part, the Baptist arguments for religious liberty are a disaster. They're far worse than, like I said, Madison's was bad. It's far worse than Madison's. I said that Roger Williams are bad. It's far worse than Roger Williams. It's atrocious. Anyway, you want to get the actual question. What is the actual question? And so that's where I developed the question. Basically, it concerns whether or not you can act against outward expressions of blasphemy or heresy in order to set conditions outwardly for the flourishing of religion inwardly. The idea is that, just like I said before, that if you, just like in your household, like you have kids in your household, you try to prevent them from seeing, like if one of those prosperity preachers pops up on the television, you probably turn it off, right? Because you don't want them to be influenced by the prosperity guy. Maybe they really want to watch that because they think, oh, a glass cathedral, and look, everyone's so happy in this weird church, and the guy's got a fancy suit on, and all the kids really want to watch it because it looks just so exciting. Um, and then you say, no, this guy's preaching heresy, right? So that's what you're going to that's what you're going to do. You're going to use your authority to create the conditions such that the truth flourishes in your household. You can't force your kid to come to faith. but you can pray with them, you can read the Bible with them, you do family worship together. All these things, given your own authority as father or as head of the household, you do these things to bring them to set conditions, as Timon Klein likes to say. Coercive conditions conducive to conversion, the 4 C's. I still to this day, I think he actually took that from me, or a version of that. But anyway, I don't know. But that's what you do in the household. So it's the same idea within the civil society, is that you're not forcing belief on anyone. You can't compel them to worship God. You can't compel them to faith, but you can suppress the sort of things that actually lead people astray, within the realm of course, of prudence. So that's the position there. But yeah, so the retrieval project overall is saying, look, these guys, they dealt with like the same issues we're dealing with today when it comes to theological disputes, and even some when it comes to politics. And it's, you see all these guys talking about civil power, the power of the civil magistrate to suppress vice, suppress enemies of God, to suppress heresy and blasphemy. They're all saying this. And then some people are saying the opposite, and then they're just coming in to say, no, this is the pretended liberty of conscience, as Rutherford would say. And their arguments are really solid. But if you go to like public school today, you might read, or college, you might read, oh, Roger Williams, the great freedom fighter of for religion, or you'll read Elisha Williams or all those guys. I mean, so. But you won't actually read these other guys. Now, apparently, Rutherford's works are being translated by Reformed Heritage Books, and so we should be able to get his. He has really good stuff too. Like he'll affirm like the two kingdom theology, but opposed to the Richard Hooker version, and that's really important, I think, because usually people assume nowadays when people talk about the classic 2K theology, they assume it's like Richard Hooker's version or the Erastian version, where there's actually other versions as well. But all right, so that's my thing on the retrieval. I think I've said everything I wanted to say on the retrieval project. I got several hundred of you in here. I haven't been actually checking the chat here, but yeah. So this is I don't like talking about like the boomers dying off. But I know what you're saying. Um, uh, yeah, I know what this is like. This is saying. The From what I can tell, the boomer's mind is thoroughly shaped by television, and namely Fox News, but also World War II, themes of World War II. And so this is why you have these like, what's that one guy's name? There's a theologian who's like all about the great tradition. And namely on the doctrine of God. He's on Twitter. Well, I forget his name now. Some people might know who it is. He's got this like the great tradition, but then like really, but then he thinks that any questioning of Israel is essentially you being horrible, anti-Semitic, and unchristian, which is really the great tradition. Well, yeah, well, what does the tradition say about that? So the boomer mind is like thoroughly just enamored with these things. The sort of people if you like, I live in the South, you drive around the road and you see American flag and then an Israeli flag. I mean, those aren't Jews that live there. They're just evangelical Christians who are have their minds anyway. And but I do think there is going to be a shift. I think the Zoomer generation is not at all indoctrinated in that sort of thing. Um, and that sort of thing, meaning like this like post World War II liberalism. I think millennials are probably a little bit kind of shifting and trying to find their way, and that's like someone like me. But I do think that over time, the weirdness of the dynamics of the, again, doctrine of God, but not the politics, is going to go away and it's going to wane. But there's going to be a lot of convulsions as that happens, and we're already seeing that now. You're going to see, yeah, like like the review of my book that came out with Richard Gamble. It's the same sort of. It's a horrible review. I mean, I say that as someone who has like pointed out several reviews that are good and are actually critical. There's a handful have made me like do one of these where I have to think through my arguments and say, "Oh, that's a good point." And a few of them, I had to admit that, like, yeah, I think you're right. So what I said there in the book is probably not true. Um, but yeah, that review is horrible. But then it's shared by Lig and Duncan, and it's shared by these other guys, and it's just not a. I mean, sorry, Richard Gamble, it's a bad review. I don't know anything about you actually very much. I've heard other people say you're a good scholar. It's a bad review. But so there's going to be these convulsions over this shift, and and what we as Protestants have to recognize that I get a sense that like the young millennials and the Zoomers are sort of unmoored from a tradition, whereas I as like sort of old millennial, I guess I have still a connection to that pro America flag waving type thing, I guess. Hulk Hogan waving the flag on in that one short video. I just things like that. The early days of WrestleMania. I just I just remember all those things. And but these younger guys, they're going to try to find answers, and I suspect that many are going to try to go east, or they're going to go try to find it in Rome, instead of essentially the American tradition, which is Protestant. MAGA, Make America Great Again. What does he again refer to? If there's an again, we're going back to some sort of greatness. And if there was a greatness that we're going back to, it was a Protestant America, because there was no time. I mean, I don't know what else we're going, but where are we going back to? MAGA hat, Groypers, where are we going? What again are we going back to? Because there was are we going to like 16th century when there was some Roman Catholic priests running around? Is that is that what MAGA is? So I'm assuming that when I say MAGA, I'm saying we're going back to Protestant America, and that's what So that's what we're moving back to. But there's going to be this like sort of convulsions among the boomers as they get older, and they can try to influence people in. But I think that there's going to be enough like bottom up pressure to get things right and actually engage these ideas, because you have the pressure coming from like the retrieval movement. You can't get around the fact that if this is why, like, I don't care who is doing it, I don't care what it is. If you're going to translate something from the 16th, 17th century, I'm going to buy it. And I would encourage anyone to buy it, because I guarantee you that it's standard stuff from 17th century. And it's like, okay, it's funny seeing these kind of like these squishy sort of moderate types or lefties doing retrieval work, when essentially you're just doing my work for me, which I appreciate. But they won't stop because it's what they're good at and they're interested in. I'm not going to tell them not to do it. But so that's like the counter. That's the sort of that's the other pressure that's happening. So as sort of the boomers kind of lose influence just because of, I guess, just because they're getting older, you have this influx of retrieval works pointing people back to, let's say, based times or classical Protestant times, and that is going to be hard to, I think, contend with. And like I've said before, they have to make a choice. Like eventually, you'll see that the Reformed tradition is, I know, and people call it anachronistic, but it is right wing. I mean, if it's anything, it's right wing. It's not left wing. And for that reason, eventually all these people have to kind of make a choice. Are they going to take seriously their tradition, or are they going to kind of follow their tradition but filter it through the post-war liberal consensus? I mean, that's really what this is about. Why do they want doctrine of God but not politics? Because doctrine of God filters through the post-war consensus, meaning it's anti-nationalist, it's pro-multicultural, meaning the post-war consensus. It's anti-nationalism. It's anti a strong sense of people in place. It's basically liberal proceduralism without any kind of sort of recognition of ancestry, without without the idea of having a strong conception of the good that the government and society orients you to. All that stuff's out in the post-war consensus. So basically of course, and also like extreme aversion to anti-Semitism, by the way, and also racism. So all those things. But then, so that means the tradition, the classical Protestant tradition that they're recovering, has to be filtered through that consensus. It has to be filtered through post-war liberalism, which means basically what governs their intellectual thought. What is the framework? What is the lens through which they interpret the world? They picked it up from largely non-Christians asserting a type of weak liberalism following World War II. I mean, that's this that's essentially what Davenant is, like Davenant Institute. It had promise. That's what it is. It's essentially just a bunch of guys who talk a lot, a bunch of kind of nerds who talk about 16th, 17th century, but are not willing to actually break free from the social conditioning of the last 70 years. That's what it comes down to. And that's true for most people. Like I would say probably almost all seminary professors and academics. They'll love, oh, I love Bootser. I love Martin Bootser. He's so great. Did you see what he wanted to help the poor? Martin Bootser was as critical of Jews as Luther was. So you see, like, people like Jake Meter on Me Orthodoxy. Oh, Bootser, Martin Bootser. Oh, look how great he is. Like the dude was as anti-Jew as Luther, if not worse, because he actually he influenced policy. He influenced policy, and Bootser is just so great. It's just all it's BS. It's nonsense. It's again like even these historical figures, you can praise them if you filter their thought through what? Through the post-war consensus. And so it's actually kind of it's all very very ridiculous. But I do think that over time, you're going to get people who younger people who are not, dare I say, their minds are colonized into a certain way of thinking, and so they're going to they're going to be more open to these things. Like you can't. I don't think the boomers can stop it. Like they can gatekeep all they want. They can shape the seminaries all they want, but I know for a fact that from the Reformed seminaries to the Master's College in Los Angeles, that fortress of dispensationalists has people who are essentially on my side. But they also know that in order to get into the OPC and the PCA, they have to go through all these licensure exams, and they have to become ministers and approved by the presbytery. So if they say anything outwardly at this point, then they will not get through. They'll affirm what their spiritual forefathers affirmed, but they won't get through. They have to essentially, say yes, Ligon, yes, Mr. Duncan, yes, Chancellor Duncan, yes. That's basically what they have to do for now. Then the Master's College, you have the guys freaking out over there being these young Zoomers who are reading Wolf's book. But yeah, so things are going to change. Like they know, like, you look at you think like the Gen X people like Davenant Institute are going to stop this? Like picture of them, I just know it's not going to happen. Sorry. Things are going to rapidly change. But it's going to happen through good arguments. Essentially, like the horrible reviews of my book and my work, they only go to help me. I mean, this is the Reformed world. Why do you think the Reformed world writes so many theological books? Because the average guy likes to consume Reformed theological works. They like arguments. So if there's people like myself and others putting forward actual arguments, like actually asserting, saying, this is what it is, this is the premises, here's the argument, here's the conclusion, boom, that's going to work in the Reformed world. At the same time, you have this move away from like sloppy aesthetics. So you have people realizing that I don't want to be fat. Oh, why is everyone? Why are these fat guys chugging craft beer? What happened to these Gen X guys? I think that was a dumb. I'll go to that. Where was I? Yeah, no. So there's like an aesthetic, right? There's a new aesthetic saying, look, try to get yourself in shape, try to dress right. And don't be a slob. I'm wearing my old PT shirt. So, but this is also my office. But yeah, there's things like that I think are going to shape up to make, because people don't, in the end, like this is the problem. Like there's so way too much. I did this tweet the other day. It's like, what was it? Like, so like men are created for action, right? We're created with bodies and muscles, and we're created to build things, construct things, and think through things, and like and bring stuff into being, to reify our imagination into the world, right? That's what we're created to do. That's what it means to take dominion, is essentially you are created by God to have the ability to make things in the world that serve your purposes, right? That's what we are. You go to your average church, and not all churches, but you go to your average church, even the reformed world, and essentially the sermon is about how you are to deal with receiving abuse. And I don't mean domestic abuse. I'm just abuse from the world, which there is abuse from the world. We do need that. But there's no sermon about, hey, young, healthy man. Hey, young, healthy guy. You know what you can do? You could do great things in this world. You could do great things in this world. You could build something. You could be a leader of men. You don't have to be this essentially functional woman. You don't have to just receive abuse all the time. Hey, man, you can be ambitious. You can say, you know what? I want to do this and that, and I want to achieve that. And I can do that. That's what young men want to hear. Instead, they hear, oh, I got to receive abuse, and this is how you deal with it. It's like a sort of therapy lesson every Sunday. And again, we got to deal with suffering. I understand, like, these people at my church were suffering. I'm not like downplaying any of that. Trust me, I understand that. But in any given Sunday, most people there, I would assume in the church, are probably fairly healthy. Most young people are fairly healthy. And even if they have some kind of condition, there's other parts of them that are healthy. So why not have sermons, or why not do teaching that says, hey, young people, you have these capacities for action. Why not utilize them to their fullest? Stop being a lazy SOB and go out there and use and fulfill your potential. And look, if you suffer an injury, or something active like nature, like if you get sick, then people are here, and there's ways to deal with that suffering and those conditions. But you're not sick. You're not that. So go do something great. And that's the wild. It's wild how much I was criticized for saying things like, lose the dad bod, or eat right, or go lift weights, or lift something heavier, or go build something. Or I was criticized so much for that. It's just so bizarre, you know. But meanwhile, book after book for women are saying you can achieve. I mean, women have like the psychology thing too, but there's also a sense of, like, within the evangelical world, that women, you can achieve whatever you want. You can achieve what you just go, go and achieve whatever you want. You go, girl. One of my kids is coming in the room. um, yeah, so you go, girl. But there's no, like, saying, dude, you can achieve. Like, you are fat. Stop being fat. Get off your ass and go do something great. So yeah, so it's very weird that that's not something emphasized very, very much, and it's criticized. People are criticized for that. And also the thing about, like, for white people as well, especially white men. I remember DeYoung criticized me for this, for essentially pointing out that white men are discriminated against like crazy. Jeremy Carl wrote the book The Unprotected Class that demonstrates this conclusively with his almost 300 pages book. I'd recommend that you pick it up. Criticized for that as well. Like, did you know that if you are basically a middle class white male, heterosexual male, you have statistically almost a 0% chance of getting into an Ivy League school? For many different reasons, but one major reason is that you simply don't fit any of the demographics they want. Now, some of those things, I guess, are changing. Chris Rufo's claiming victory here and there. Sometimes I think that's exaggerated, but things might be changing on that front. But still, you are the most, like, hiring practices at corporations. Like, we see these companies eliminating their DEI programs, but is that going to change the actual practice? I know I have friends who were laid off. They're white guys, laid off from their company, not for because they did anything wrong, not because of any of those reasons, but for no reason. But then when they see who was hired instead, it was all essentially minorities. And this happens in the tech industry all the time. You have like an Indian becomes an HR manager, and then a bunch of people are let go, and then suddenly they're replaced by H-1B visa holders from India. So like, these things are happening like all over the place. But just pointing this stuff out and saying, look, white men, and not being like this. Probably you don't want to become like these people who complain all the time. This is the struggle for being essentially like a sort of heritage American, is like you don't want to be a guy who just whines and complains and say my rights and all that, because that's not who, like, we don't do that. Like we stand up and punch the guy in the nose who's offending us. Like that's the sort of thing that like way we'd respond. But so you don't want to do that either. But at the same time, just recognizing that meanwhile, for years, like even from De Young and all the way more to the left, recognizing certain aspects of anti-black sentiment and within the United States and the last few decades, they're all for talking about that. But you mention white people or white men, and they're like, whatever, they don't care. That's being divisive. That's not right. How did I get on that? I don't even know. All right. Well, I'm having a good time talking to myself, and that's what I'm here for. I don't know if anyone's listening. I'm literally just kind of talking out loud, and you guys are talking out loud. And here you are. Let's see if there's any more comments here. I'm sorry, I don't follow the comments. There's probably some people upset with my anti Roman Catholic posts recently. Yeah, I mean, yeah, the American tradition is Protestant. I don't know how else to get around it. um, let's see here. All right, well, I will be talking at the New Christendom Conference on Friday. My talk is Friday morning. It's right after Joe Rigney. And I'll be talking about multiculturalism. The title is it was given to me. It was called Against Multiculturalism. And it should be an exciting time. If you cannot actually make it to the event, you can get like the streaming for like $30, I think. You can check out the New Christendom website. My guess is that my talk is going to be controversial. I don't know why. It's on multiculturalism. But I'm basically going to try to argue that that America, that in American history, there has been a recognized, even back to the founding, a core sort of ethnic group. So this idea that we were founded such that there was no sort of core people group that we'd call American, or there's a core people group of Americans, that would be false. That actually well into the 20th century, there was a core people group, and it was a confident and dominant group. And it was the group that to which everyone ought to have assimilated, at least according to their perspective. So this would be basically Anglo-Protestantism. So the claim that we're multi-ethnic from the very beginning in principle is false. And actually the very universal principles of the American project, or the American experiment, if you want to call it, are undergirded by a particular culture, a particular people who have embodied that culture. And that would again be Anglo-Protestants. Anglo-Protestantism is primarily a culture, and it's a people of ancestry as well. But there's a sort of openness, and this is not me being like a modern, like post-war liberal, but there was from the founding a sort of openness for conformity into this thing that is uniquely American. Again, it's like American Protestantism, or I think someone once described like Englishness on steroids or something like that. But it was open in the sense that people could actually become sort of grafted into it, not in a melting pot sense. So you could have like the German Protestants assimilated really well in the early 19th century, but that it became under strain in the kind of middle period and later because of Roman Catholic immigration. That was a main point of contention. The fear being that Roman Catholics were in places that did not have a tradition of liberty, did not have experience of liberty in the Anglo Protestant mold of it, and they couldn't affirm it. Also, that they were beholden to the papacy, which at the time, and people don't know this, in the 19th century, the papacy was adamantly against liberalism. I mean, particular in Europe, of course, but that would spill over into America when you start attacking notions of religious liberty and freedom of speech, things that are explicitly stated within our First Amendment. Now, there's ways to understand those properly, of course, but they would explicitly denounce all that. You kind of wonder, hey, these guys are submitted to this guy up in the Vatican. What do we do with these people? And so there was a lot of fear of Roman Catholic subversion, and there was precedent for that. I mean, the Pope literally commanded that the Roman Catholics in England would overthrow Queen Elizabeth in 1570. So there's a bit of precedent for it. And really, the Roman Catholics did not calm down when it came to politics until the 20th century. It's fairly recent. Sorry, that's just the fact. In the 15th, in the 14th, well, yeah, yes, but also in the 16th century, they were the most murderous group all of Europe. Like you think, oh, Servetus within Geneva. No, nothing compared to the sort of murderous tendencies of Roman Catholic regimes in Europe. So anyway, I don't want to get too much into that. I've offended the Roman Catholics enough, but everything I just said is true, of course. So you can struggle against the truth if you want. But yeah, anyway, I'll be at the Christendom conference flying out tomorrow. I'll be there Friday. I hope to see you. And then next week, I'm gonna be in Richmond at some event. I forget what it's even called. You guys, I hope to see you guys there. If you're at the GA, at the PCK GA, it'd be very nice to meet some of you guys. Even if you're critics, you realize that in person, I'm just a nice guy. Very nice guy. So you can meet me there. We can talk. You can argue with me. You can try to hit me if that's really what you want to do. But I don't think that'll work. But imagine PCA pastors trying to. Anyway, what do we got next? Have you always been a nationalist? Very good question. So, yeah, so like my influences, if you look at I was actually kind of a neocon. Like to my disgrace, I was kind of pro. I was kind of pro the Iraq War when I was like 17. So and I joined the military a couple of years later, and that was not so I don't not exactly I guess say proud of that, but I mean join the military is a different story. But yeah, I mean, but my dad who died a couple of years ago, but he was like in thought and instinct was a total paleo conservative. He was a Buchanan Brigade guy, total like Reform Party guy. He wasn't an intellectual. He would not understand anything I've been talking about in the last hour, but he had the instinct, partly because he grew up in like rural California. Like he was I'm Californian, but my dad was like essentially a cowboy. He grew up in a chicken coop, like poor, like totally poor. Lived in a chicken coop with his parents and three siblings or four siblings. Rode horses, put frogs in his pants for some reason, sort of thing where, hey, they're in a pond and they start picking up frogs and they like, oh, where are we going to put these things? Really, kind of boy stuff you do in the 40s and 50s. And so he was like that kind of rural guy. And I think he communicated, or that kind of communicated that to me. So I think he was really instrumental in some of the political side, not so much the religious side. But that was really important. I know paleocons don't really like nationalism. I get that. I get the critique of that, and I acknowledge and respect that critique that paleocons are not nationalists. So I understand that. I don't really want to get into that, but that is, but yeah, that's kind of my origins for when it comes to politics. So when I woke up from my dogmatic slumber in midway through college in 06, 07, that's when I realized that I despise these people who are going to send me to war, and they're liars and they're war criminals and they're horrible. And They are. I mean, because basically, like you think of the neocon liberalism of George Bush. It's universalistic. It's actually a lot similar to your. This is why like elite evangelicals are still kind of in cahoots in the way with the uniparty in Washington, because they have a universalistic mindset as well. They think that the liberalism of today, or at least the ideal of it in the last 50 years, is the only way. Like that's it. Like this what everything before it was bad. We finally learned Christian politics from a bunch of non-Christians after World War II. That's they wouldn't say that, but that's how I would say. Um, it's universalistic, which means, yeah, if you're an evangelical like George Bush and then the guys today, yeah, you take over Iraq and you say, look at these beautiful principles. See these beautiful principles of liberty? Look at this bullet point: equality, liberty of conscience, free and fair elections. Isn't that wonderful? And you think all those guys, the Sunnis hate the Shiites, and then you have I apologize for not remembering the Kurds. The Kurd, you think they've been fighting for centuries, and all of a sudden, like, oh yeah, free and fair elections. Yeah, that's right. I'm just going to dispense with my natural instinct for ethnic brotherhood, and I'm just going to get rid of this sort of blood, but this our violent history of fighting each other and our theology. I'm just going to give all that up because look at these beautiful propositions that George Bush has just handed me. Look at this. I got my purple thumb. I got my purple thumb. It's utterly stupid. It's like it's the stupidest thing you can ever hear in your life. But people were bought into this. I remember like back in the day, I remember watching Pat Buchanan call this out as utter nonsense. And me thinking in my mind, Pat Buchanan's right. He's right. He's right. But here I am listening to Hannity and these other guys. So to my shame, I'll blame it because I was 17. But it's just utterly stupid. But it's a universalistic mindset. It's this idea that we have within the liberal West, we have the universal truth. And what are we going to do? Oh, we also have bombs and missiles, and we're going to bomb the hell out of some other country, and then suddenly hand them a piece of parchment that lists all of our propositions. Aren't those beautiful? And you think they're just going to affirm it? They're going to affirm it if you hand them a bag of cash. If you think they're going to affirm it just out of some universal moral duty, oh yeah, just enlightenment just happened to me suddenly. Yeah, I just got done gassing the Kurds. But yeah, you're right. Equality, equal protection. Such bullshit. Like it's like the kind of delusions that we tell ourselves in this age. Like somehow, like if you were taken in by that, like me, there should be a lesson learned of what the heck are you there? And of course, like all these countries are, as Trump called them, that they are exactly that. Yeah, so it's a universalistic mindset, right? That like it's universal, and we have the truth. We bomb them into submission and say, no, you got to accept it. And what do you think Ukraine is? I mean, come on. Like Ukraine just had, like Kyiv just had their pride parade thing and all that. The gay is real, meaning the globalist American empire, GAE. It's real, meaning that we use our dime, the diplomacy, information, military, and economic power. That's the acronym, to force upon other countries, to browbeat countries into essentially becoming part of the gay. That's what we try to do with Uganda. Uganda serves as a lesson for everyone. And now you have these countries in South America and Central America legalizing abortion, legalizing gay marriage. What was the latest one? Was it Argentina that just legalized gay marriage? I can't remember what it was now. But what is this? It's sort of liberal imperialism. It's like seeing the world as needs to go into our image. It's very different than like a Chinese imperialism, which doesn't care. Like China, if they become united with get a treaty with Saudi Arabia, they don't care if Saudi Arabia bombs the hell out of their own people or suppress women or whatever. They don't care about that. Same thing in Africa. They don't care if like different tribes are killing each other in Africa. They just want law and order so they can get their resources or businesses. They don't care about that. But the U.S. does, I mean, presumably care. We don't care about Saudi Arabia in that sense, I guess. But, I mean, Saudi Arabia literally killed, what was that? Literally killed killed now I'm trying to what is it? Killed some journalist in Turkey or something like that. And then anyway, I don't get that, but um, yeah, and that's the ideology we were bought into, but it's the same ideology that you see today among evangelicals, which is that the absolute principle of politics are essentially what we've had since the post-war in court, and that should be true um, everywhere. And also, okay, so yeah, internationally, you can bomb Iraq, and all of a sudden, everyone's green thumb in it, and they're like, "Oh yeah, liberty, equal protection, hooah!" That's what they're doing, right? That's foreign, that's international, but domestically, it's the same view. It's the same view domestically. Oh, we have America's founded on these universal principles that are true universally and can be affirmed after, like, a few years of education in our education system. And so everyone who comes here, they're all going to become an American after just going through a process of education. It's the same universalistic mindset that says they don't need generations of commitment to liberty. They don't need a way of life that undergirds these systems or these propositions. They don't need all that. All they need is just maybe a few years of education. But of course, they can retain any culture they want, any heritage they want, any connection and dual citizenship elsewhere that they want. They can do that all they want. So, but we'll bring them into those propositions. Now, ultimately, most people, in my estimation, they would affirm the propositions, but not in a moral sense, as a sort of condition for the things they get. Like, you benefit from being in the United States because it has a very, very strong economy, and the distribution of GDP. It's not like, of course, it's focused on the top, but it's actually the people have a high income in this country. And so anyway, you get stuff, and that's you firm the propositions, but you don't actually believe it. Anyway, it's the same thing, universalism across the board. And so allow everyone, allow the Palestinians, the Palestinians in Palestine, they get bombed. That we give Israel the bombs, they bomb the country. Then, okay, you invite them here now, and they'll all just warm their hearts to our glorious propositions. Of course, that's actually not going to occur. But all right, where are we at now? I'm enjoying this so far. Okay, there are some people. Bendel Wary. Is Bendel Wary still here? Is he still? Did he want to? Bendel Wary might be here. Everyone knows Bendel Wary, doesn't he? He may not actually be here, but so he's up there. You know, I think Bendel probably dropped off. I was going to ask him about what is it, Wary's law or Bendel's law? All right, Wendell, you're out. Okay. Well, missed some of these questions here. All right. So, any recommendations for the post-war consensus? So, what I would say is, the Rusty Reno, his book, "The Return of the Strong Gods." He kind of, he doesn't say everything I'd want to say in that book, but he does kind of lay it out what that is. It's essentially the you could say it's the like essentially multiculturalism becomes the official policy. The Open Society Foundation or Open Society becomes the central kind of theme. You have the Adorno's view of the authoritarian personality, and so basically all of post-war life is dominated by you not being a fascist. Like, that's kind of what it boils down to. It's anti-fascist without the sort of Antifa thing. Okay, so that's the idea. The worst thing you could be is a Nazi, And this is why, what's his name? Not William Bennett, NPR guy, not NPR, National Review guy. Why can't I not think of his name? Bill Buckley. So Buckley is like he was most offended on air when he's been accused of a lot of things. He was most offended when he was accused of being a Nazi, which I guess that's fair. But it goes to show that in the end, the worst thing you can be in the world is not a racist or trans or homosexual or anti-white or anti-American or burn the flag or none of that stuff. In the end, the worst thing you can be is a fascist. And the fascist, of course, is anything that would fall under the the um the the category of authoritarian or authoritarian personality. So this idea of authoritarian that you hear all the time from people accusing me of this and others, this is rooted from the post World War II lexicon of political rhetoric. So again, authoritarian personality. And what they were doing is they were trying to figure out how fascism happened. Like this was a problem. I mean, it wasn't like the absolute utter degeneracy of occurring within Berlin in the 1920s and 30s. It had nothing to do with that, or like the utter, just like the horrible conditions under liberalism prior to Nazis taking power and in Italy. Had nothing to do with that. No, it was this sort of psychological thing that happened. It has to be explained because it's so utterly irrational that it had to be explained as a deep pathological condition. And so what they did is it was authoritarian personality. Now that work has been, as I understand, pretty much debunked, and no one really takes it that seriously unless you're in the realm of political rhetoric. But people psychologize the right all the time. Like I mean, even Doug Wilson, frankly, Doug Wilson's done it. Like you said, if you question certain aspects of Jewish power within the American or Western context, he's going to say it's a matter of envy. Now, whether he's right or wrong, what he's doing is he's psychologizing it. Instead of refuting any claim, he's using the psychology to essentially pulverize the claim. That's the standard move. And this is why one reason why you don't actually have to engage the right in society with anything except moral denunciation. Okay, so if you're further right than like David French, or if you're further right than your typical center right guy, you are like a head case. You're psychologized, and what meets with that is moral denunciation. So you don't have to refute anyone's claim. You just say it's evil or whatever, and that's it. Where if it's someone on the left, you actually have to engage and be nice, and you have to kind of tiptoe around because they might get offended. That's of course that's because the environment post World War II is that the worst thing you can be is a Nazi. The worst thing you can be is a fascist. And again, that label doesn't refer to anything it doesn't refer back to social political phenomena of the 20s, 30s, and 40s. It refers to a creation of the post 1940s, of the 1950s and 60s by social theorists and psychologists, creating this kind of idea of the fascist, of the Nazi, which then infiltrated into discourse and rhetoric, which means that if you are to the right, we can call you a fascist and then dismiss you. That's the move. Why is it that like Stalin and Russian communism of the USSR is not talked about in such evil terms? Why aren't people called like a Stalinist, but they are called Nazi? Or why aren't people not called communists within kind of this popular discourse? Because it doesn't have any power or weight. You call someone a Nazi, it actually has weight to it because of the realm of discourse, despite the fact that Stalin and Mao killed far more people than any fascist did, than the fascists did. It's the worst thing you could be is not a communist, but actually a Nazi. Again, you kind of created this aura of this rhetorical environment, and that's the result. So that's why you're often called a fascist. It's all actually in itself stupid, but but it works. Like it tends to work. Like the National Review guys, the worst thing, like, oh, I don't want to be called a fascist. Like that's the worst thing they could be called. That's the worst thing. Yeah. So that's the idea of the post-war consensus. Um, kind of like in a nutshell. He says return of the strong gods, meaning like Rusty Reno, because there is this return to look for a more thick and robust relationship of people in place. Because the fear of, again, if Nazis are the worst thing you can be, well, whatever would overlap with that, or whatever they want to overlap with that, there's a lot of things on the left that would overlap. But whatever they want to overlap with all those things, like this sense of homeland, the sense of place, a sense of people, that's all denied in the post-war consensus. I mean, frankly, it's only denied to white people. It's not denied to anyone else, but it's only denied to white groups. They're not allowed to have a people in a place, and if they do, they're bad. That is, the people are bad. So you're only allowed to identify with the bad things of your ancestry, but not with any good things. So you can't have, you're not allowed to have a positive regard for your ancestry, only a negative regard, and you have to own whatever they did as your own action. So that's the sort of that. But the exact opposite is the case for all non-white groups. That's just the fact. Like non-white groups can own, claim, be proud of their ancestry, but don't have to actually own anything that negative about it or bad about it. In fact, they can deflect all those bad things upon other people, whereas whites are the opposite. So, like if you, so if you're an Englishman, a white Englishman, you have to own essentially the evil of colonialism, but you can't actually own any of the great culture as distinctly yours. You have to universalize it. Anything good that would be in your ancestry has to be universalized, such that it's actually for all. It's for everyone. Whereas the bad stuff in your ancestry is particularized and only applies only to you, and you have to own it, and usually make some sort of you have to somehow expiate the guilt. Like the guilt upon that is placed upon you, and you have to act and you have to make acts of expiation to remove that guilt, which you can't actually remove. How the heck did I get on that? Oh yeah, post-war consensus. So that's basically kind of what it is in a nutshell. It's something to overcome. Like we have to get over all that stuff. We have to say that most people in the world have a strong sense of people in place. Sometimes it goes wrong, but it's also just very natural. It's but we have to have and what I just mentioned actually is partly what I'm going to say in my talk on Friday. So yeah, that's why it's going to be, I guess, a bit controversial. We'll see. But yeah. So in terms of like action, what to do, what I want people to do, and it's what I'm going to do locally. I've been kind of inspired by recent events with friends to do more things locally with guys. So like what I would recommend people do, if you're kind of on my side theologically, if you're not on my side theologically but kind of politically, then you could do something a little bit different. But what I think you guys should do is start a local group where every week, every couple weeks, you just get together for an hour and a half at some location, maybe a cigar lounge, or I don't know, a pub or whatever, or someone's house, their backyard, whatever it is, and just read and discuss an article from American Reformer. So you guys should know the American Reformer um, website, run by Time and Klein. I'm not formally a part of any of that, so I have no formal connection. I'm just friends with several of the people associated with it and in it. But that's what I would recommend is just one of you guys, maybe one or two you guys lead it up and select which article you're going to read, send it out maybe a few days before, and just meet up and just talk. And it doesn't have to be like a sort of planning session for the revolution. It just can be you just getting to know each other and talk. So I'm convinced it's incredible. Everywhere I go, there's people I sit down and like, man, this guy's. I initially think he's kind of normie, maybe from his online activity, maybe from his other interactions I've seen. You actually sit down with them and talk with them, and they are not normie. They are actually they love the conversation you're going to give them because finally they get to say what they've been thinking for a long time. You realize how many people out there? There's more people than you think. They think certain things. They have um, sometimes they can't articulate it well, but just giving that space where they can articulate it, it's freeing to them. They enjoy it. Like it's to them, it's like, wow, finally I get to I get to say I get to say the sort of things I've been noticing in the world. And here's an audience that's like, yeah, 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 that's right. That sounds right. And then you have the other people who may be normie in their like their thinking, but their instincts. Like I think if you're, if you're an evangelical, most evangelicals, I think their instincts are probably actually good. You just have to kind of bring that out. And in your conversation, things come up and you're able to and so it doesn't have to be a big thing, just a few guys. So just decide to meet together. Someone choose an American Reformer article. If you end up talking about things other than what's in the article, that's great. If you end up talking about other things like, hey, how do you do family worship? Like stuff like that, that would be great as well. So that's what I'd recommend for like local action. That does more than you think, because then you realize, hey, this guy is like let's say he has this sort of job, okay, and then let's say that he gets doxxed or he gets in trouble, he loses his job. You know him. He comes to the meeting like, yeah, man, I was fired because I said this or that online or whatever. And then you're able to say, hey, you know what? I know a guy who might give you a job, or hey, I might need help in my business or in my property. I'll pay you some money to do this or that to kind of hold you over. There's ways you can establish these networks of trust where you can work together, build together, and help each other out. And this is I've been a part of some of that. Like people have lost their jobs, and I have other friends where it's like, hey, go to this guy, okay, talk to this guy, and we've been able to not always, but sometimes able to get them into the right place to help them out. So it's a sort of thing where in order for people to be bold, not rash, but bold, they have to have some kind of network to rely upon as they do that. And if you don't have that, if you're isolated, we're never going to kind of get anywhere. So that's one really, really important point. So thanks for asking that question. Wow, this is an interesting question. I mean, I'm surprised anyone would even ask me this. Of course not. Um, so I guess of course not. That's an easy one. uh, all right, this is kind of a theological question. I don't know if everyone kind of cares about this as much, but I guess I'll quickly talk about it. Like the so it's not wrong in itself for a pastor to hold office, but you can't see it as like a pastor cannot hold office as a pastor. So meaning that he can't function in he can't conflate the two offices into one. That would be like quasi papist in a way. Um, so you have to hold the offices distinct. But theoretically, yeah, I mean, one guy can hold both offices and function both. That's like Dusty Devers essentially does that. But one reason why I don't think that's preferable is that I see the church as administration of the kingdom of God, and they do word and sacrament, and so their concern should be mainly this directly the souls of their people. Althusius has a line that says that they shouldn't have the same office because each office takes the whole man. Like, how can some guy be a legislator in a legislature, and be concerned about civil politics? while also concerned about everyone's soul within their church. So you can't do it because both office takes the whole man. And there's very different kind of ends going on here. Like I want my pastor to not care so much about my politics as much care about my soul, or care about what I'm doing at my job or whatever, but actually care about the soul. And of course, those bleed over, but that's why I think. And also, I think a lot of pastors just are not. The pastoral office is not, the training for that is not a political office. The rhetoric is different. Well, oftentimes the subject matter is different simply because the salvation of the soul is not exactly subject matter of your regular daily public office in civil politics. Um, Two different sets of laws, I would say, two different kingdoms in a way. So yeah, so that's why. And actually, historically, a lot of places have made it illegal, illegal to do this. I'm not talking about secular places, but it's been illegal. I forget Time and Klein, of course, he would know where. But there's been places where they've essentially banned that. Like if you are a minister, you can't be a politician, or you can't be a magistrate or a statesman. And even in our own founding, I mean, we had John Witherspoon, but I think he was the only minister at the time, and he was also serving as the president of Princeton. Now, at the time, I think it was called New Jersey College. Now it's called Princeton. So that's kind of a public office as well. So he was, he was also a minister as well. But he was with everyone else. No one else was a minister at our founding period. They were all statesmen. Many of them were lawyers, some farmers, some military folks. So that's what I would say to that question. There we go. So this one is on capitalism. Yeah. I mean, this is a really complex subject. I hesitate to even talk about it. I do believe that as a matter of principle, the first principle of the economy is that the national economy should serve the people of that nation. So it's not the nation for the economy, it's economy for the people. Now, that being said, the question of how to achieve the economy serving the nation is, I guess, the question of economics. So the fundamental moral principle is that if you have like a nation that has high national wealth, but that national wealth is located and fixed upon very, very few people, and other people are suffering from that, then that would be a problem, I think, for the economy. Now, how do you fix that? Is the concentration of wealth due to policy or to the absence of policy? I am not what I I hesitate to say what to do because I think it's a complex subject. What I don't like a lot of times is when Christians they'll open the Bible divorced from any other broad considerations of national characteristics, um, and the like traditions economy, the state of the economy, the state of industry, the state of the sort of economy it is, and just have this blanket blueprint. This is what economics is from the Bible. I hesitate to do that. I think that's just weird. If you read economics from Adam Smith, um, up through like Ricardo and what's his name? Not Schumacher. He will come to me, but these guys, if you read these guys, they're dealing with complex economic issues, and to simply have a blueprint model extracted from scripture apart from all of that consideration of economics, I think is just foolish. And we should identify our broad moral principles recognize our tools for action and policy, and try to have the best policies to produce the best outcomes. Now, again, that doesn't mean it's going to be one or the other, but we have to have smart people, and so like I just cringe like people like I think R.C. Sproul Jr. posted about has a book about this like on economics, and I haven't read it, but I just cringe at looking at that. It's like all this work on economics, and all we needed, I guess, was just a bunch of principles. But does it work for an agrarian society? Does it work for a industrial nation that is, let's say, you have a nation state that is being just bombarded by other nation states that are doing like subsidizing their industry and they're destroying you locally. What do you do in that? Do you just ideologically commit to like free market and free trade and within your polity? I mean, it just seems to me that there would be questions of if you are just being destroyed by foreign subsidy and or surplus dumping, like what's it called, like dumping upon your to lower prices for foreign goods. What are you going to do? It just seems to me that these questions are very complex, and we should get our moral principles in line before we start making these determinations. So, yeah, hopefully that helps. It's probably not super helpful for everyone, but uh, yeah. So I guess I can touch upon this. I mean, the interesting thing about the Groiper army is that they tend to want to just swarm and go after you, which has been fun. But yeah, it seems to me that if you say America first and you tie that with MAGA, what's the again refer to? Like when I say America first, I think of 19th century Anglo-Protestantism that has a strong Sabbatarian commitment to Sunday. It has the Protestant work ethic. It has Protestant principles of liberty that were developed through the English constitutionalism and into English practice, and largely developed by um, by Protestants or Protestant sympathetic people. So you take the who like if you take the French Revolution, you have these strong Enlightenment guys like Rousseau being influential, who's really not religiously orthodox in any sense. Um, and but you take like the English Reformation or the English Enlightenment and those influences upon America, you have people like, like John Locke was in part influential. And the only kind of Roman Catholic you see influential at that time was Montesquieu. But Montesquieu on the American founding, for the American founders, he was loved by the English Anglo world, because he basically said that the English system was far superior to anyone else. Like it was the ideal republic. That's Montesquieu's point. Even though I think he was like a nominal Roman Catholic. And then the nuisance when it comes to theology and philosophy, and who's often considered the kind of founder of modern philosophy, was Rene Descartes. And Rene Descartes was Roman Catholic, and many think that he was. I mean, he was a committed nominalist, first of all, which is again ironic given some Roman Catholic polemics. But he was a strong nominalist, and he influenced theology. He was influencing Protestant theology in a way in the latter part of the early part of the 18th century as well. But he was Roman Catholic, and he was actually in a way responding to some Protestant polemics, because the Protestants were saying, no, you can trust your senses. No, you actually can trust in a way your reason and your thinking. That's why you can interpret scripture well. That's why in principle you could read scripture and come to the proper conclusion of it, because you actually do have the faculties for considering in the world. And Descartes' response was radical doubt. No, actually, radical doubt is the fundamental principle of philosophy. And then from there goes the rest of philosophy, modern philosophy. Uh, but yeah, and then in Roman Catholic theological system, you are you are bound to obey the dictates ex cathedra of the Pope. And this was a major problem in the 1640s. The mid 17th century, because like the Roman Catholics in Maryland wanted to immigrate into Maryland, but the condition for the immigration was signing an oath of loyalty to the English monarch. Okay, but the Pope said, "You do that, I excommunicate you." So there was the question early on, even from the mid 17th century in America, whether or not Roman Catholics could actually commit themselves to America first, could commit them to. I mean, that sense it was English first, English monarch first, but it was the same principle. Who's like, where does your ultimate allegiance reside? It's one thing to say, like in a Protestant sense, that my ultimate allegiance resides with God, from whose law I obey, or whose law I obey in this world, or Christ who reigns from heaven. It's another thing to say that I obey this earthly being who is in a foreign country, who from a foreign land can dictate the beliefs of my conscience, who can literally tell you, you must believe this. And then if you don't believe this, you will be excommunicated. He can literally do that. And he doesn't have to even give you a reason, because his authority, his dictum is enough. It is sufficient ground for you to believe, even if you have no other reason to believe. Even if to your mind there's good reasons not to believe it, he is sufficient ground for you to believe it. Which means, from a Protestant perspective, he's a false teacher, and not only a false teacher, he's also someone who claims the power of consciences of people in your society, and who can order you to overthrow the usurper in current power, and will excommunicate if you don't follow that out. So you don't think like Protestants had serious concerns over Roman Catholics for years, for centuries, legitimate concerns, especially Queen Elizabeth, was excommunicated, which of course, natural enough, I guess. But then she wasn't just excommunicated. The Pope then said she's an illegitimate ruler. And all you Roman Catholics, you must resist her physically, even violently. So a man hundreds of whatever it is miles away in the Vatican claims the minds of people all over the world under these legitimately planted civil rulers. You don't think that's a legitimate concern? It wasn't until the 20th century with Vatican II that the Roman Catholic doctrine updated or developed that now affirms religious liberty. It's hilarious. Like, Roman Catholics have this thing where all of a sudden, like, they claim something and they say, "Oh, of course, that's what we always believe." And it's like, "Oh, religious liberty, that's our new thing." Well, that's not new. It goes all the way back. Have you read Tertullian? It's silly, but yeah, it wasn't until the 20th century in Vatican II that all these things came about. So there was legitimate concern. If you're in a Roman Catholic country, then that makes sense. Like, you can submit to the Pope and doesn't seem to be subversive, I guess. But if you're in a Protestant country who then looks at this guy sitting in the Vatican who claims the minds of people within your jurisdiction, that's not a cause for concern. The reason it's not a cause for concern today is twofold. One, Catholic doctrine has updated. And two, the Pope doesn't have any control over the church. Yes, no. I mean, it's astounding how the lack of control. I mean, in some ways, he didn't have a lot of control ever, but nevertheless. So yeah, I think there's legitimate concern there. Also, like, America was opposed to that. Like, a fundamental principle of America is the Protestant principle, which is the conscience is free. That is a fundamental principle of the American tradition. Okay, so if you're going to say America first, but then you're also going to affirm, hey, this guy in the Vatican can tell you what to believe, and by his authority alone, you must believe it, or else suffer excommunication. It doesn't make any sense. That's why I say it's Vatican first. And by Vatican first, I mean the man in the Vatican. which whom I don't claim. I don't think he's a mediator or vicar of Christ. I think he's not any of that. And no, nor do any Protestants. Okay. So yeah, it doesn't make any sense. Like MAGA. What again? What again are you talking about? The Jesuits from like the 16th century? I mean, what's the again refer to? Is it like, okay, the streets of like the of New York, the Italians? Yeah, MAGA means like the Italians of New York. Is that, or or the Catholic Irish in New York? Is that what it means, or Boston? It doesn't make any sense. It's appropriation. It's appropriation of the Anglo-Protestant America for the sense of America first to sound based, and it really is nothing of the sort. If you're going to be America first, then it doesn't make any sense for you to affirm something that violates a fundamental aspect of our tradition going back before there was a United States. Even in Maryland, this is the funny thing. Yeah, we had Roman Catholics in Maryland, and okay, later on Charles Carroll. But in order for them, they recognized they had to do all these mental gymnastics to deal with these two: the English, the demands of the English monarch, and the demands of the Pope at the time. Okay, the demands of the monarch, it says you will do a loyalty oath to me, and the Pope says you do that, you get excommunicated. And they had to do all these gymnastics within early Maryland in order to do that and somehow appease both. But in the end, they had to essentially sign the loyalty oath. I mean, they tried to modify it. There's an interesting history of that, but in the end, it was like, and part of it was actually the appeal was to the tradition of almost like the two kingdom tradition, that the Pope concerns himself with spiritual things and the civil concerns itself with the civil things. What is that? The what is it? The Gallican? I forget the exact terminology now, but there is that tradition, and they were appealing to that. Of course, like Vatican I destroyed that, but or developed it away from it. But yeah, it just doesn't make any sense. I don't mind. Like, I'm not saying you can't be Roman Catholic. I'm not saying you can't be pro-America. It just doesn't make any sense. I mean, even within like the social movements, the motivation of like the 1924 Immigration Act was a Protestant Anglo-Saxonism. It was the fear that the Roman Catholics entering the church, entering the country, were going to permanently alter the country. It was Anglo-Saxonism. That's Henry Cabot Lodge. The same thing earlier. The Know Nothing movement was essentially a very strong and powerful movement. It disintegrated not because it wasn't powerful, but because of the slavery issue, and the Republican Party kind of took it up and all that. But it was again reacting to Roman because of the fear that they could not fully understand the Anglo-Saxon ideas of liberty. And that Immigration Act of 1924 was the policy until 1965. And you all know what happened in 1965, the Immigration Act of 1965, which is the source of all of our troubles. So the official policy in general of the United States, the general spirit of America until 1965, was animated largely by the fear that the Roman Catholic immigrant would undermine the politics of this country. And guess what? Who do you think was the ally, the great ally of FDR? Why do you think JFK wrote the book Nation of Immigrants? But just go back to FDR. FDR appealed to the Roman Catholic, kind of like Irish and Italian base, and other immigrants to enact the New Deal. The New Deal was made possible by the influx of immigrants who were accustomed to welfare states, who were accustomed to direct federal or direct government intervention into their lives. They were accustomed to it. The old right represented the old Anglo-Saxon Protestant perspective of liberty. FDR brought this in, and FDR brought it in because of support from immigrants who were accustomed to welfarism. That's true of JFK. It's true of LBJ. And to this very day, Roman Catholics still in large numbers vote for Democrats. It doesn't change. Like the values of immigrants on average do not change over generation and generation. You think there's assimilation? No. It doesn't. I mean, of course, many do. Many certainly do. But most, it's like the absurdity of thinking, oh, they're natural family values and they're going to vote for us because they affirm family values and they're religious and they're Christian. No, they're not. They want free stuff. They want social services. They want welfarism. They want government intervention. They want they want government loans. They want scholarships, ethnic targeted scholarships to go to college. So yeah, America first. America first means rejecting. Well, it means affirming the Anglo-Protestant origins and foundation of the country, and it means admitting that the problems we have today are rooted in part, immigration from Roman Catholic countries. Now you can like fight against that all you want. It's just a fact. You can be American. Fine. I'm not questioning you being an American citizen. I'm not saying go back. I'm just saying it doesn't make any sense to be America first and also to be Vatican first. It doesn't make any sense. All right, now that I've offended all the groypers, I actually, I don't, I'm offending you guys, but I just think you should become Protestants. I mean, to like anyone's credit, but this is the difficulty. I mean, you become Roman Catholic, and you can go to mass, and your priest doesn't really care who or what you are. So, yeah, you can go to church. You sit there. There isn't, in general, as I understand, a lot of community within that. So you can become Protestant, remain based, and say what you want on wherever, and then you can attend church, do mass, do sacraments, all that. And I guess I get that. But then you're thinking, well, if I become Protestant, where do I go to church? That is a very good question. And my friends and I we've talked about that too, because like, where would you go to church? Like where, if you want to be based in right wing, like look what look what I have suffered and other people, or pastors who are a little right wing, like Zach Garris in the PCA, how he's attacked and people like, we got to hound this guy out. So where do you go? I get it. That's a completely legitimate question. Where do you go? And we're trying to work on that. There are, yeah, it depends on your area, of course. But I admit that is difficult. It used to not be the case, of course. It used to be the case that Protestants were the Protestant church was the established mainline church, like had a sense of responsibility for the country and its people. And you could go to these churches and feel as if not only were you worshiping God, but you also you were proclaiming a stake in the American way of life. But you can't do that as much anymore. You can go to an OPC church. There's many wonderful people in the OPC, but they have no sense of mission in that regard. PCA, some, but you'll also get a bunch of Kellerites who want to do racial quotas in their churches and committees, and even other denominations as well. So that's my rant on that. Go to Stephen Wolf's church. Move if you. No, I have a very I have a wonderful pastor, and it's not an activist church, but he does strongly care about our well-being. So just put it that. Free Church of Scotland. Okay. That's funny. No, I mean that's true. But Scottish churches can be goofy too because they are really sensitive to racism. So, and by racism, I use that in quotes. So that's one thing to look out for. My pastor, but is that? Oh, my pastor is a Kellerite. Am I going to make it? Yeah. People have asked me, do I leave over politics? I really think it depends. I mean, if you're still hearing the gospel, if it's a true church, you still hear the gospel. In general, the application is good. And it doesn't turn, if not every sermon's like this political sermon, that's fine. Like the church I was in Baton Rouge was, he was like a Van Drunen, ironically, a Van Drunen, Horton, Keller, 2K guy, modern Two Kingdoms guy. And actually, it worked for me because he didn't talk politics, which is okay. Like I'm okay not hearing politics from the pulpit, and but he was interested in saying, look, these people came here to have their souls fed, and that's what he did. So he's a good pastor. But yeah, you have to make the judgment call. I think no matter where you leave, if you ever leave a church, I had to leave a church once over disagreement. You should do it as quietly as possible, even if you think it's a serious issue. And you should do it, you should do it with, you should meet with the pastors. You should talk with them, express your concern, try to make that as civil as you can, and then formally ask to be released from membership to go to a different church. And so don't just get up and leave, because if it's a false church, then maybe that doesn't matter. But if it's a true church that you just have strong disagreements and you'd be better served elsewhere, you have to recognize them as your pastors, as your shepherds. And so you should do the right thing and formally request that you're removed from the membership rolls on account of this reason, say, and want to maintain peace, and then just move on to somewhere else. So don't be one of those people that storm out. That's just stupid. Yeah. And also don't try, like, unless it's serious, don't try to do a church split. Don't make a big deal. Don't contact your friends about how this pastor's horrible or whatever. Just that's what I would do. Okay, so some had a point. So I've had a lot of reviews of the book, huge amount from every denomination, from like even lefty guys, like even Reason.com, Reason magazine or whatever did a review. It was a stupid review, of course. You expect Reason to actually have a reasonable review, you're in trouble. Yeah, it was dumb, but anyway, they did it. And then everywhere else you see reviews, and there's new reviews. I mean, the book is almost 2 years old, and it's still getting reviews, which is kind of cool. Even though they're all negative, but that really doesn't bother me. I guess if they're all if I got all positive reviews, I would be essentially like I would be one of these like celebrities that is like, if you get all positive reviews for a book, it indicates that people are too afraid to criticize you, So I think like Carl Truman's book on the self, I think that was one of them where he got all positive reviews, and like, okay, well, I didn't think it was that great, but that's a different matter. But anyway, most negative. So I think some of the critics had a point. It would be interesting to hear you elaborate on that. But yeah, I mean, I think like Glenn Moot said that I didn't emphasize Protestant constitutionalism, the tradition of constitutionalism. So this would be a very legitimate point that I guess I should have mentioned that when I described the Christian Prince, I basically just did. I said these are all the things that he could do. These are permissible. Like within you could design a system in which he could do this and that and that and that. That would be permissible. It may not be prudent, but it's permissible. It's getting hot in here. I think I closed my window. Hold on a second. Just get hot in here. It's getting hot outside. Yeah, but constitutionalism is a way that you take power, and over time you begin to kind of curtail that power or channel it in different directions. So you can take our constitutional system in the United States. You can think of power, like political power in the abstract, as like a singular thing, and then it's broken down into its functions. So you have legislative, executive, and judicial, and then you have to make the choice constitutionally where you're going to kind of divest those powers, like who has or what has those powers. You could put all three powers into one man if you wanted to. Like there's nothing in principle wrong with that. In principle, I guess, and but our founders decided to place these different functions of government into three separate branches with balances and checks. Okay, so that was that was the system that they put in place. Anyway, constitutionalism is a tradition of sorting out problems and establishing power and checks within a framework of law. So you have architectonic laws like our Constitution that then govern all the rest of the laws. Kind of like if you read Livy, his History of Rome, in part that's like the development of the Roman Constitution from monarchy into the Republic, and then out of that, it's a very long, kind of long-winded story, but it's basically the conflict between the plebes and the aristocrats, and then their development in that interaction in development. And then Rousseau picks it up in his histories of Livy, or his lectures on Livy, and that he basically says that the different powers and forces in clashing one another is what developed the Roman Constitution. So there is that, and that's one thing I guess I could have brought up, is the constitutional, like Protestantism and how it was reflected in the founding. That really wasn't what I was going to do, but if I had talked to Glenn before writing the book on these points, I would have included something on those, because that's important. Because that is traditional. Like it is paleoconservative to say we have a tradition of constitutional development that has found ways to vest power and also to restrain or constrain that power from tyranny. Like it didn't always work and doesn't always work, but anyway, so that's that. Another one would be, let's see, it was kind of minor, but there was a point on covenantal theology. One of the best critiques of my book actually came from these guys at the Particular Baptist YouTube channel, and I don't think anyone knows who they are, but they really took the time. You should watch these videos of them. I forget their names now. I apologize, but Particular Baptist on YouTube, and they really went after the theology and the covenantal theology side. And that was one of those where I was like, okay, I got to think about these. And I was outside like swinging hammers, like building my deck, listening to it. And I had to stop and be like, oh crap, how do I respond to these guys? They're smart. And so yeah, that happened. But I'm trying to think of others. The criticism of like the word nationalism. So the criticism that by using the word, I'm tapping myself into a tradition that isn't a thing until the 19th century. Okay. Now, I do early on say that I'm not doing that, but I understand the confusion of using a term that seems to grow out of the French Revolution, which is not what I want to do. In fact, I critique that right in the very first paragraph of the book. Is to reject the French Revolution. So I understand that that critique as well, also from the paleocon side, they like more regionalism and local government and decentralized authority, and nationalism is far more centralized. Paleocons tend to distrust, not all, because Pat Buchanan kind of had a nationalistic outlook, but a lot of them, especially from the South, like Southern paleocons, get very nervous when they see nationalism, because they think basically Yankees in New England. Like they're very anti-New England and anti-Yankee. And in fact, Thomas Fleming, what did he call me once? He called me in person. He said like I was just a carpetbagger or something. Like he called me. I forget what he called me, but he basically said I'm just a New England centric guy, which Timon would love that. But anyway, we were cordial afterwards, I guess. But yeah, that's the fear, is that nationalism, it would be run by New England and it would just oppress everyone. So that's one of the issues. The The other thing would come from more like the pagan right or the non-Christian right. That their fear is that Christian nationalism as being a nationalism, but Christian, is that in the end, the principle of inclusion is simply that you're a Christian. So that is immigrating here. Are you baptized or you're in? So it doesn't matter where you're from, who you are, what country, ethnicity you're from, and that'll be the ideology, which is actually in a way kind of what a lot of evangelicals are. Like if you ask them, like Neil Shinvey, he's very adamant that like you cannot exclude immigration if they are Christian. Okay, that's like a sort of Christian nationalism in a way, uh, and and I understand that critique, and that's why I go through. I try to develop a system that would not lead to that, that cannot lead to that. And I do that by saying that actually a nation is not simply the Christian or the grace aspect, but it's a people with a history and a heritage and way of life that's grounded in a particular place, particular way of life. And the Christian aspect will infuse every aspect of that. It'll kind of be the total, the totality that shapes kind of the whole in each part, but not each part's going to be Christian. Not each part of the nation is going to be distinctively Christian. You know what I mean? So like um like you might have different cultural practice of how you shake hands or how you acknowledge someone's presence, or opening doors for people, or the way you conduct greetings and salutations and goodbyes and all these like manners that we or like eating habits. All these things are things we've developed that are not distinctively Christian. But if you have a nice very pleasant and suitable way of eating dinner with your family that involves these manners and customs. When you become a Christian, you're not limit. That's not being destroyed. You're not eliminating that. So that's what I try to argue is that I understand the critique and the fear, and many Christians are kind of like that. You'll hear people like Russell Moore talk about this, um, but that's actually rejected in the very inherently in the very theory, very Christian nationalist theory. So thanks for that. That's a good question. I'm trying to. I don't think I can't think of any others. Um, yeah, yeah, yeah. Bye, bye, Neil. So Neil Shinvey is an interesting guy. He actually lives down the road from me, and he knows I live down the road from him. But neither of us have tried to contact each other. In fact, I ran before the book came out. I ran into the guy. He was at my he and our kids, his kid, my kid, were at a cross country meet. And I looked over and I was like, I know that guy. I know who that guy is. And I looked up and says, "This is Neil Shinvey?" He's like, "Yeah." It's like Stephen Wolf. So we introduced and we were very friendly with one another. He was he had his book and he has highlighter and he's highlighting words. And now I know his ridiculous highlighting habits, which are I won't say anything, but he has that habits. And but yeah, I mean, what like Neil Shinvey, like he's a sort of guy who he appeals to a type of average intelligence normie crowd, um, and he appeals a lot to sentiments. So instead of actually refuting arguments, he'll do a lot of quotes. He'll do screenshots, and he'll talk about how things are dangerous, and so he'll appeal a lot, not entirely, but he'll appeal to a lot of normie sentiments. He's like a That's how he communicates these things to people. I don't know if it's mainly women or men or whatever, but that's his kind of appeal. What's interesting, his co-author for the book is actually an academic. So it's one of those interesting things where why is Neil the guy who becomes the front man for the anti-woke in the evangelical world when his actually co-author is an actual academic and he's well spoken. He's a very nice guy. Actually, I had lunch with him. He's a very nice guy. And so I don't know. It's interesting why Neil is the front man, the face of the anti woke movement for the evangelicals. But that's what he does. It's like an appeal to normie sentiment. And so people on the right, what they're trying to do is trying to kind of poke at that sentiment. They're trying to say, no, actually, these positions are absurd or ridiculous or false. Um, and that's it. So yeah, and he doesn't really know like the Reformed tradition very well. Like his review of my book said things that he assumed things about the Reformed tradition that were false. Like some of the old like the narrative of what Calvinism is. Like the people who affirm the 5 points of Calvinism usually actually don't know what they're saying. In my experience, not everyone, but many of them don't actually know what they're saying. Um, but yeah, I would actually be very open to having a discussion debate with Neil if we can hone in on the question. I feel like he's the kind of guy, if we just kind of have it really open ended, he'd start asking me these like questions to try to, because, if the whole tactic is to try to get people to say things that then you can highlight and put on Twitter and say, look, he's outside the norm and this is scary. Well, then of course that's going to be what you're going to do. Like, so I don't want to, there's, I unfortunately did this with that goofball, Michael Bird, that theologian, Michael Bird. You guys know that guy? He's a I had I thought a very cordial discussion with him where I said my views in detail and explicitly with argumentation. And he decided to pull out like 10, 15-second clips of these and do shorts on YouTube to basically make my position out of context and outside the actual argument I'm both presenting and the argument I'm responding to. And that this is how a lot of people of my critics like that will respond. And probably this video and probably my video of my speech that'll happen on Friday, I'm sure that'll happen as well. So, but that's how things are. That's how things are. Yeah, yeah, and their book on with him and NT Wright is just not a very good book. So, but that's yeah, he's not a good guy. I mean, I don't really usually say, I wouldn't say Neil is a bad guy, but Michael Bird's a bad guy. He's not. It's one thing to know from the outset that the guy is trying to like he wants to like that he wants to kind of twist everything you say and take clips and try to sort of try to do one of these like gotchas. But when you're talking to a guy and he's like, "Oh, okay, yeah, yeah, okay, oh, yeah, yeah, yeah," you think, "Oh, I'm having a good conversation." Maybe in real life, Michael Bird is not what he's like on Twitter. Maybe he's not actually an asshole. Maybe he's not. No, but it turns out he is. But I don't care. Like in the end, my wife like sometimes she search YouTube. She's like, this guy said these things about you, and it was pretty bad. I was like, yeah, well, he's a prick. So, yep, yep, yep. Well, it's been about 2 hours. I've enjoyed this, and people are watching, but I don't have any if you guys have any questions, I guess I can keep rattling on. I need to work through my speech for Friday. But again, if you guys want to tune into that, I think it's like $30 for the New Christendom. Not just for mine, but I think you can get the full thing, which will include Joe Rigney, Chase Davis, and it should be a good time. It should be a very good time. You're gonna read Owen's 20. Yeah, Owen Strahan apparently wrote a 20,000. I actually did flip through it, and I mean, he didn't address me as much. A lot of these guys, they want like someone like Owen wants to go after people like Doug Wilson and Joel Webbon because like Owen's like wheelhouse, I guess, is theology and scripture, if he has one. And that's the sort of method that's the method of Doug Wilson and Webbon are more easy, not easy targets, but they're more kind of in that world than mine. Mine, I do all sorts of things. So, I don't, yeah, my method is a bit different than theirs. So I think he focused mainly on what they had to say. He did kind of ascribe to me like somehow he wants to say that Christian nationalism is eschatology focused, which might be true for Doug Wilson and Joel Webbon, but it's not for me. Like I literally don't mention eschatology in the entire book until the end, only to say it doesn't matter. So it doesn't factor into my system as much as others. And so he's like Owen said it's post millennial, but again, it doesn't really matter to me. Other things too, yeah. The idea. What was the other thing he said? Oh, that we all appeal to the Great Commission in Matthew 28. I mean, I don't do that, and I'm okay with people doing that. I just don't build my political theory from that verse. I'm not saying I couldn't. I'm not saying I wouldn't. I'm just saying that I don't cite it in the book because I don't think I need to. But I'm all for people doing that. But again, like he says that we all do that, and I don't do that. So, but anyway, no. The point is, I'm not going to read it. Joel Weapon. Yeah, yeah, he's a good guy. All righty. Oh, yeah. That's good. I won't answer that one. Cranmer. All right. Well, I think that's enough. Again, thanks. About 1,500 people are tuning in, which is very nice. If you listen in the background, yeah. Actually, you know what? I will say I will talk about this a little bit. So, one of the one of the benefits of me not being post mill, and one of the reasons why there's so much confusion around my position. The second there's confusion around my position because people in the reform world do not know how to engage Christian political ideas apart from eschatology. Now, if you read anything prior to 1950s or 60s, you might find that very strange because it is strange. Like I haven't read, like you read books on Christian politics from 16th, 17th century or the 18th century. And yeah, there's some millenarianism, there's some of that, this and that in there. But in terms of the actual politics as to its foundation, its principles, what you do, how your work matters, law, no one's appealing to some millennial kingdom or doing eschatology as we understand eschatology today. Uh, everyone thinks that, so they think that it is. This is. I'm sorry, I've been using saying stupid a lot, but it's moronic. It's moronic. You refuting postmillennialism does not refute refute the idea of Christian political order. It doesn't. Calvin was, I would say, essentially an amill. A lot of people were essentially amill for a long time. There were postmillennial people, I get that, but a lot of people were amill. Lutherans who are on our side are amill, as I understand anyway. I've never talked about it, but as what I gather, and other people as well. So I get that there's differences within the tradition on this, but you refuting postmillennialism does not refute the idea of a explicitly Christian political order. So then other people think too, well, Wolf's system to have a Christian nation has to be post-millennial because only in a sort of millennial reign within providentially instituted by God would this actually work. But that's not true. Geneva was a Christian city-state. In the 16th and 17th centuries and 18th centuries and beyond, England had a national church. It was a Christian nation. To this day, I think most would call themselves a Christian nation, Christian people. New England, the Massachusetts Bay Colony was a Christian colony, a Christian people. Same with Connecticut. In fact, every colony in the New World in those centuries would say they are a Christian people. They're a Christian nation. And also, not only that they are individually in a particular way, but in a universal way in relation to England. They're part of a Christian nation. They're English. Englishman means Christian, means you're Christian. So, going to those, if those conceptions and those political orders didn't rely upon a some sort of us entering into the kind of the reign of the thousand or whatever the millennium as it expands, or the kingdom as it expands. So none of it actually makes any sense at all. But again, people can't think outside of it. And this is one thing I'm hoping that my work and people, American Reformer and Timon Klein and others, what they're doing is they're trying to show that Christian politics is not merely this sort of eschatology debate. That it's more, it's not even that. It's not even more than that. It's not that. To my mind, America becoming a Christian nation does not necessarily rely on some providential promise of God saying all nations are going to be Christian. It relies upon Christians saying this is a Christian country, now we ought to act accordingly. That's ultimately relies upon human action. Now, I'm not saying there's no aspect of divine providence, I'm not saying God's not in control of all things, but at the same time, the actual people on the ground creating a Christian commonwealth are Christians saying, we're enacting this law, we're enacting that law. This custom right here, that's pagan, we're doing that. But yeah, we're going to keep this. Like, that's us doing that. And so it doesn't rely upon eschatology or, it relies upon us actually doing it on the ground. Okay. Wait, what is this saying? That James, I didn't read the second part of that quote. Oh, James Durham's. Oh, okay. Yeah, that's more like Oren McIntyre's thing. I haven't read his book yet. Yeah. Okay. That's that. Yeah, so post-mill doesn't matter as much. Yeah, because a Christian nation in the end, like if you wanted to, a Christian nation in the earthly sense is a nation that does Christian things, rooted in a conception of itself as Christian. That's basically what a Christian nation is. It's a nation that in their collective life do Christian things, and which comes out of them understanding themselves as Christian. So they're worshiping people. They have Christian greetings and manners. They have Christian prayers. And that doesn't even include necessarily an established church, but it could include an established church. It would be that there would be norms of behavior in the public that would be considered Christian and would be enforced both perhaps legally, but certainly socially. And that's what a Christian nation is. And what's the purpose of it? To create outward conditions that are conducive to conversion or to heavenly life. Okay, so that's what that is. Yeah, someone's pointing out that it was James Burnham. I don't know who James Durham is. I cut off from the bottom. Yeah, James Burnham. I was confused there as well. So yeah, read James Burnham. Someone on the chat is like, don't say that. But anyway. All right. Well, I am going to close it down now. But I enjoyed this. I should do this more often just for my own enjoyment and my own therapy session of talking out loud. But okay. Thanks, cultural dweeb. Okay, now I know. I guess oh, right. Okay, now I see it. I'm sorry. Yeah. His book on Revelation. Got it. So okay, sorry about that. I was very confused for a moment. Is that the bottom of it was cut off from my screen, so I couldn't tell what it was actually saying. And then I immediately went to James Burnham for some reason. But all right, well, thank you. I will do these later, and perhaps you guys will watch me in a couple of days. So have a great rest of your day.